My name is Matt Tim. I'm the Chief Marketing and Revenue Officer at FFB. We're a true blue community bank in Fresno, California. My journey started in a series of tech, pharma, and market research startups. So living in Fresno, as being an entrepreneur and an innovator, I always wanted to keep myself at the pace of forward-thinking businesses that were just really going wild in Fresno. And you're thinking, well, Fresno. And so actually we get a lot of people that come from Silicon Valley and they come to live because it's a lot less expensive to live in Fresno than it is in Palo Alto and Menlo Park. And so Steve Miller, who's the president and CEO of Fresno First Bank, at the time is now FFB Bank, moved to Fresno. And I noticed something really, really quickly. I noticed that he was I would say he was a banker at heart. He went to Columbia, went over to Asia, built banks, focused really in the payment space, came back to Fresno, and got hired at FFB Bank. And then when he came to Fresno, he was different than most CEOs. He was in banking. He was very, very young. He's 49 today. He was an accessible person. So, what I started doing was basically becoming an advocate for the bank, and then as I was doing my startups, I would go to the bank and say, hey, would you guys fund me with something from for one of my startups? And they always look at me and turn me away and say, hey, you're just way too risky, Matt. So on the other side of that, what I would do is say, hey, guess what? I'm going to bring customers to your bank. And so flip forward to April of 2020. It's the start of the pandemic, PPP's in full force, and Steve says, hey, guess what? You with all your tech chops and being someone that's developed software since you were 16, help us figure out how to do PPP and get us through PPP. And I said, you got to be crazy. They were a paper-based bank, PDFs, none of the tech and tools were in place. And so basically overnight, we went from paper and PDFs to customer onboarding, full digital. We use tools like DocFox, Monday, OneDrive. We've got a good core. And we were able to, through PPP, to do $400 million in loans and about 1,000 loans. So again, like overnight, we were able to switch. And so, yeah.
Awesome. And maybe before we dive in really quick, I'll give the 20 seconds on me. So I'm a partner at Index Ventures. I co-lead our fintech team. Have been in and around the payments world for nearly a decade now. Worked at Stripe for about 5 years before I joined Index, and then worked at Goldman and private equity from before that. So Matt's the real expert here on payments, but I've dabbled. But let's get to the topic at hand. Everyone here wants to hear about FedNow. What does that mean for how the banking ecosystem is going to change?
So let's jump right into it. FedNow means that you and I can transact business with FedNow, peer-to-peer, B2B, C2G, G2C. There aren't any barriers. If you look at the existing rails that exist right now, they're very, very clunky. We've been doing this type of transaction in Asia for years. And so when you look at that, it basically takes tech, people, and APIs to get that stuff done. And so FedNow is going to open up a whole new world for smaller community banks that are just starting to think about it. If you look at FFB, we're an acquiring bank, so there's one of 60. We're one of 60 in the United States that have an acquiring license for merchant and merchant sponsorship. So I think if you're looking at it and you're curious about it, there's a world of opportunity for you.
Great. And I think historically the banking sector has been somewhat split in terms of technological innovation. Some have been more forthcoming with it. Others maybe spend a little bit more time on kind of flight to quality, making sure everything was compliant. And FedNow might change that. But I guess how do you kind of view the world where does this allow banks that may have historically been less tech forward to catch up to others that have been?
So if you look at innovation and payments, 80% still goes through ACH on payment rails. 90% of businesses still accept checks, and 80% of businesses still write checks going out. So when you look at it, It's a direct connect. Look at your accounting systems, look at business accounting systems, and look at banking accounting systems. It opened up a brave new world.
Great. And maybe could you give us some potentially sample use cases of how maybe whether it's clients of yours or people have asked you, what are some of the case studies or use cases that you might see?
So specifically for us, being an acquiring bank, we sponsor 13 ISOs and a couple super ISOs here in the U.S. And so for us, we'll have ISO partners come to us and say, hey, guess what? We have 5,000 merchants, and we want to get direct settlement across those merchants. And let's say that vertical or inside that merchant layer is restaurants. So restaurants want to be paid out on that Saturday or that Sunday after that business on a Saturday. And so right now, the way the rails work, that doesn't happen, right? That gets paid out on Monday. So if you look at it, it's 365, 24/7, and it changes the whole landscape of the way payments function.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of think through. And in your mind, does this quicken the pace of innovation going forward? Like the speed with which, whether it be banks, your clients of the banks, will iteration speed increase over time?
So I would say that most banks have been focused on risk, safety, and soundness. Obviously, there's a lot going on. Look what happened on March 13th. I decided March 13th we were going to switch from Fresno First Bank to FFB Bank. So crazy, but it worked and it happened. I think again it's going to rely on tech people and thought leadership inside the organization to be able to do it. Now, there's a bunch of information. There's a ton of literature out there on how to do it. There's obviously early pilot banks out there that are exploring FedNow. So if you're curious, go for it.
And so we're in an age now where information is spreading quickly, and there's a lot of things are hyped. In today's market, right? AI is maybe the most topical of that. Where do you see? Let's start with the hype cycle. What hype is sort of merited, and what hype is what's overhyped right now in the context of what banks could use, FedNow, innovative payment rails, et cetera?
So it's funny that you say that. So I have this big thing with ChatGPT now. Like everyone comes to me and says, "Hey, will the bank use ChatGPT?" And I'm like, you know what? We've got tools out there that can do this. Coming out of the market research space, there were 600 tools that literally did around the same thing. I see a lot of stuff in banking with some similarities. When someone comes to me and says, "Hey, we can help you with all your digital account onboarding," again, business bank. So I said, "Can you truly help me with everything? Like you can do everything?" And so I'll just say, like with FedNow and bolt-on tools in an existing community bank, you can do a lot. I started out, we put together, we started out with a secure job form server, Monday.com. We used a tool called DocFox. I don't know if you know Ryan Cannon from DocFox, but the team at DocFox is incredible. They built us a custom layer for all our digital account onboarding. And it does everything. Like right now, we can do a business account in less than 90 minutes. I know that doesn't seem like a short amount of time, but taking a bank that was going from paper and PDF to being able to have someone walk in and do an account, we basically send a text message, and once they go in, they put in their driver's license information. It does all the business search across all 50 states, and then we're ready to go, and we can even fund that account. And so as far as FedNow, I would just say that there's tons of opportunity for it, and it'll be interesting because I think it'll be a slower adoption, but I think what you'll see is it'll start chipping away at some of the other, and I won't say their names, but it'll start chipping away, and even at our sponsor here, it'll start chipping away, right? And so it opens up the opportunity for smaller banks to be able to have a seat at the table, to be able to do payments in a way that is really, really quick.
Interestingly enough, you mentioned kind of what are the biggest blockers in the adoption of FedNow? Because on paper you kind of go, it makes sense, everyone should adopt it, or for a variety of use cases. Why do you think the rollout's going to be a little bit slower than some might anticipate?
So I think the reason why they haven't adopted is because there hasn't been this constant innovation in community banks, right? Community banks go away because market compression and no succession planning, right? Like we operate off a playbook. We operate off a playbook every single day. We focus, our big things that we're focusing obviously right now are on safety and soundness, but operationally it's against, executing a well-defined risk management process. Organizationally, it's performed the best to attract the best people out there. And then technologically, it's around APIs. And so we've built our own middle API layer. I would say that if you're curious about APIs and you know nothing about APIs, there are some really, really good partners out there that can help you develop those APIs. The good news is that they've probably already developed it. So for you to do that, to bolt it on, it's not that challenging.
And so maybe kind of jumping back into what's underappreciated. We talked a lot about what might be overhyped. What do you view as what's not getting enough love right now?
So for me, being a payments bank, and this term has been overused, but it's an old school term. It's big data and data warehousing. So you can learn a lot about transaction histories, and you can learn a lot about a person around their bank account and the transactions. And so when I look at that from the merchant side, for us, what we're looking at is we've built a layer inside the bank that allows us to bring in that merchant data and then make that relationship sticky where we can offer them a DDA bank account, right? And so not only can we offer them a bank account, then we can offer them a loan or any other opportunity, right? So for us, it's around the data and the data layer, and I think that's part that's not really being focused on. You look traditionally at cores. Cores are still clunky. They're running on legacy operating systems and information systems. Having a computer science background, I look at it and say, wow, there's a lot of stuff that you can do. Now you don't want to mess with your core from statements and transactional but if you want to build tools outside your core, there's a ton of things that you're able to do.
What about, is there much differentiation in your mind? How would you separate? In the beginning, you mentioned a variety of use cases, right? We're talking C2C, B2C, B2B. Could you kind of walk through the differences between each of those types of payments and how you're seeing the world change in each of those segments?
So being an entrepreneur and small business owner before the bank, how did I make my tax payments? Well, if I wanted to pay through credit card, right? How did that happen? That happened. I go on the website. I've got to go somewhere else. They're going to charge me 10 to 15%, and then I get routed to another middle layer, another layer, another layer, and every time you get routed through those layers, they're taking some froth, off the top, basically. So, I'll see. I'm hoping that I see that frictionless transaction. Hey, Mark, I just gave you $100, and you're like, thanks, Matt. Even now, when you do that, it's still very clunky. My wife loves some tools where she can group and pay her friends, and I'm like, do you realize what that looks like on the back end? It's spaghetti, right? So I would just say that there are big opportunities. I recently had a company come to me and talk to me about cross-border fuel payments. And so if you look at the model of cross-border fuel payments, they're either paying in cash or they're delaying that payment for a certain amount of time. And so what if they could, when that fuel arrives, they could have a transaction phone to phone, and then if they were to settle that transaction early, that vendor may be able to provide that customer a discount, right? So it doesn't traditionally happen that way right now.
So we've sort of touched on a lot of archaic or older forms of payment methods. That could be anything from wire transfers, ACH, paper checks, credit cards. With FedNow, what is most at risk in your mind? If you had to walk through all of the old payment methods, what would you pick as the kind of the top method that might not be here 10 years from now?
So I would just say I'll approach it from the bank side. So as an entrepreneur, I heard the speaker this morning, and it totally resonated with me, is I think about the end first, and then I backtrack myself. So what does it need to look like, and how am I going to get there? And so if you look at FedNow, it's really people, software, and documentation, right? It's not complicated to be able to do it. Now, again, depending on what core you're on, if you're on a top 3, top 5 core, those cores already have potential integrations into FedNow. I've seen some pilot banks already running transactions. So I would just say that, start at what the goal is, which is the end. Like, I want to implement this, and then what is it going to take to do it? So.
And maybe kind of on the thread of what's at risk, what is going to see a boon with something like FedNow. When you think about, my world, the fintech side of the world, does this commoditize new fintech companies when you allow legacy financial institutions to sort of come up to pace? Or does that lead to more innovation on the fintech side of the world? Or is it a hybrid? Is it a hybrid of both?
So I think it's a combination of both. In the U.S., you're still going to need that middleman, which is that sponsorship bank. So even in all fintechs, if they're doing payments in the U.S., they've got a bank behind them. So I don't know if you ever noticed the bottom and you see Fintech XYZ. At the bottom of that, there's always an acquiring bank. You may not see it. It may be in 6-7 point font, but there's always an acquiring bank. So as that continues to open up, there's a lot more advantage to it, and there's also a lot more opportunity for innovation. I think I truly believe you'll see more innovation that comes out of FedNow just from the standpoint of there will be a bunch of tools or middle layer that exist over the top of it, and it's new business for those founders and those startups.
Great. Well, I think we have maybe a minute or two left here. So Matt, maybe I'll kind of ask you a closeout question too. So in general, what's your best advice for folks sitting in the audience right now with regards to FedNow and what to expect, and what should they do differently, if anything? So
I would just say be curious. I came into the banking world 3 years ago. 25 years, been developing software since I was 16 years old. I'm 49. I would just say think differently. I've seen it from what we're doing as a bank. We were a sub $400 million bank. We're a single branch operation. We've gone full digital. We bank in 30 plus states. We do payments in 40 states. And we went from 400 million to sub 1 billion, 400 million today. And we went from 40 people to 120 people in less than 3 years. And so I would just say that have a plan and execute across that plan, and be checking yourself every single day in what you're doing. And so I would just say that there's a lot of opportunity right now for community banks in general, or banks in general. If you look at what's gone on in the marketplace and also what's gone on in tech, there's a lot of people out there that are highly qualified to make an impact on your organization. So, it starts with people, and it starts with strong leaders, and then you can get the tools together, because a lot of that stuff exists right out there on the show floor. Well, Matt, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I'm sure everyone here appreciated it, and thanks everyone for your time. Thanks, everyone.